you have a practice or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to a very special episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. And we can actually call this a bit of a crossover podcast because we also have our good friend Scott Wetzel from SkyView Partners, and we do the Advisor Financing Forum podcast there. So you're getting two for the price of one for attending this podcast and listening to this podcast. We're doing this podcast specially for the second annual Virtual Financial Advisor Summit, put on by our friends at Broadridge Advisor Solutions and the Advisorist. So it was great that they reached out to us and invited us here to talk about some of the trends that we see for advisor transitions coming in the next decade or so. So great to see you, Jeremy. Great to see you, Scott.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I thought we'd kick things off kind of by a prediction that Jeremy and the team at Truelytics made probably a couple of years ago. We got this great wave of transition coming, right? And a lot of that's based on demographics. The average age of a financial advisor right now is about 62 years old. And there's been a lot of studies that have made some predictions that about 40% of advisors are expected to exit the business in the next decade or have some form of transition. So maybe we could start with each of you, and I'll kick it to you, Jeremy, first. But what are your thoughts on those numbers, and how should advisors who are listening process that?
Thank you, Mike. And it's, again, a pleasure being here. The average age of financial advisors between 59 to 62. I mean, that demographic pressure is for ownership transition really is high. And our thesis is it's about to explode. And outside of the 30 to 40% that is probably going to retire in the next 10 years, on the flip side of that, if the industry is going to keep its current service levels, which it may not need to given technology, et cetera, but if it is, there's another 240,000 financial advisors that are going to need to be trained and recruited. And so it's coming from both ends of those spectrums that I think it's going to put some really dramatic pressure on this industry, and not just in this industry. Obviously, it's going to impact a lot of industries because this is a huge generation that's going through this transitional moment right now. But outside of just the sheer volume of both those who are looking to retire and the sheer volume of those that are going to need to be recruited and trained, the industry then also still has a gaping chasm in being able to really prepare for unplanned succession events, right? We've got this huge statistic out there that 80% of financial advisory firms don't have an emergency continuity plan in place. And given the demographic trends, that just seems to be an enormous risk to this industry, especially as, you know, those assets under management, depending upon relationships with the next gen, et cetera, could be at risk at moving. And so this is a really big focus for the enterprises that we're working with. And we're seeing a lot of really amazing innovations coming out of broker dealers in particular, but also OSJs, et cetera, around tackling this head on.
How about you, Scott? What are your thoughts there? I mean, Jeremy mentioned their thesis about a lot of things they're seeing, but you're coming at it from the angle of helping to finance deals that get done. What are some of the core drivers that you're seeing over the next decade, or that you're expecting to see over the next decade?
Well, first of all, I'll point out, I feel like that average age of 62 has been the average age for the last 5 years. I don't know how that's possible. It's just kind of interesting. And I would agree that all the demographics certainly point in the right direction for a lot of M&A activity. But as David Grau, senior at FP, points out, that historically only about 2%, in his opinion, and he's been doing this for 25 years, right, of independent or registered investment advisors actually retire, sell their practice, and experience a liquidity event. So that being said, the demographics are all in favor of a robust M&A activity, but at the end of the day, if senior advisors don't find an attractive M&A marketplace, and that means that an attractive experiences are going to sell their practice, attractive buyers, and liquidity at close, they'll keep doing what they've been doing for the last 50 years, which is basically dwindle their practice down to nothing. So it's really incumbent upon all of us to make that experience for sellers in the marketplace to make it a favorable experience in a lot of different ways.
I think that's a really important point that you made there, Scott, that historically there has not been the right structures in place to facilitate the type of retirement liquidity event that the advisors who are operating in a wirehouse environment used to have access to. And part of that is, and I think it's important for us to remember, we're kind of at the tail end of the first generation of what we now call financial advisors, particularly in the RIA segment and the independent financial advisors, kind of reaching the point where they would think about retiring, right? This is the first gen, right, doing this. And so solutions like Truelytics and solutions like SkyView Partners are new because the problem is new, I think. Let's spend a few minutes going on the three primary types of transitions. We've touched them each a little bit here, but there's planned succession, which usually involves transitioning your succession planning within the organization or somebody within the independent financial broker dealer. There's M&A, what we think of a classic merger and acquisition, and then there's emergency unplanned succession, which happens here, and that's the unfortunate one. So let's talk a little bit about planned succession, because I've learned so much from each of you about that process. Jeremi, Truelytics was kind of founded on helping advisors plan for succession, was it not?
Yes, it was. Yeah, no, it was. And that's really born out of our True Performance module, which is very practice management focused. And it really helps advisory firms be able to get a clear diagnostic on the health and wellness of that business, really with the eye towards a strategic exit for them. So optimizing the intrinsic value of that firm itself. So yeah, that's exactly what we were founded on. Now we've expanded beyond that so that we have a solution for emergency continuity. We have a solution around the plan succession side that supports matchmaking. But you're right, the core of our solution since our inception back in 2017 has been focused on that. And it's really has been the whole solution that we've architected as far as an advisor transition management platform is really trying to tackle both the expense and the amount of time planned succession events and unplanned succession events for that matter, and M&A for that matter, take. It's primarily driven by professional services in the industry, and it's very expensive from a transactional cost. Transactional, not so much on the deal side, obviously there is that, but transactions from just how long some of this takes and how expensive it is with consultants that are in play.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me to think about I don't remember the exact number, but you've talked about it quite a bit, about how large a population of financial advisors that lack a succession plan is, right? There's so many of them are operating as if, Scott, kind of as you said, they're going to retire in place. They're just going to sit there and let the business dwindle off to nothing. But the reality is Father Time is undefeated, right? The bell will toll at some point in time. You may need to have a succession plan, and having one is really a smart business decision. Scott, you and I were recently talking about a new trend. I guess it's new to me. Maybe it's not new, but that, succession planning, the way that oftentimes an advisor may think of it, like, hey, listen, I'll have a junior advisor and just hand the business off to him or her. That's changing. That's evolving with the influx of financing, right? That it used to be that the younger advisor would take over the business and kind of gradually give an earn out to the senior advisor. But that's changing a lot. How is that changing for the planned succession?
So we have seen a proliferation of what we're calling a merge-in transaction, where senior advisors oftentimes are not particularly interested in what amounts to be a contract for deed, to keep working for another 5 years. They're basically holding the note or the risk of the transaction or the transition working, and they don't get that immediate liquidity event. Whereas with a merge-in transaction, it's kind of combines the best of the internal succession and an external acquisition, where we keep the internal, oftentimes junior advisor in place with a minority equity position. And maybe they haven't had one in the past. So it's an option for them to actually get that minority equity position, because oftentimes, the problem starts is when they go to look for bank financing, that senior wants liquidity at close. Oftentimes candidly, they haven't been paying that junior enough to have the personal net worth of a bank to say, yeah, we'll give this person a $3 million loan. So then the bank financing part falls out. But when we combine both the internal advisor, that's the wishes of the senior, and we also bring in an external acquirer to do, let's say, an 80-20, 70-30 split as kind of co-guarantors for the bank financing. Now you get the benefit of their personal balance sheet, the external, and the practice balance sheet. So all of a sudden the math works for the bank as well. And also that senior advisor can keep that junior in place, get the liquidity event he or she desires when they want it. And then for the junior, what we're also structuring is a right of first refusal to acquire the entire practice at some later date. And for that external buyer, we're bringing in an average age is about 57. Average age of the internal is 41. So they actually get a much larger long-term opportunity with the merge-in. I'm not going to say everybody wins because it never seems like that's a bad cliche, but that's a transaction that seems to be very, very accommodating for most participants.
I thought that was really fascinating when I first heard about it, because it is true. Like most junior advisors aren't sitting on, $1.2 million ready to rock it and acquire a business. So there's going to have to be some financing involved. But kind of as you said, like most junior advisors don't have the capital to even put the down payment on or to really facilitate it. And one of the things you've talked about before, and I think we'll dive into this more in the M&A discussion, is the business itself might not be able to support that level of financing if it's just staying within that business. You do need to bring another business to play. Jeremi, I wanted to dive in on succession because you have a solution called True Match, which is really important and it's solving an important problem that I think many advisors might relate to. I think we'll probably see some head nodding if we could see the audience here on this one, is that, hey, you know what? I'd love to have a succession partner, but I'm all by myself here, right? I don't know who would be my succession partner, and I don't really know where to look. I've never done this before. It's a brand new thing. Where do I go? Right. So can you talk a little bit about True Match and how that works for advisors who may find themselves in that position where, like, it's not that they want to retire in place and fade off and let the business trail off. They just don't know where to start.
Yeah, no, that's correct. So that's a new solution that we just launched in December. So it's about a month and a half old, and it's a matchmaking solution. In many instances, I've always referred to ourselves as becoming the eHarmony for planned succession events in the wealth management space. In fact, I think the better comparison is Zillow. We're taking a page out of their playbook. We're indexing this entire industry and giving the industry a really easy and quick and available solution to be able to assess the opportunities that exist out there. I think that's part of the issue, is that so many of these small lifestyle businesses operate sort of like on a moat, and being able to find strategic partners, be it for planned succession or unplanned succession, et cetera, has been a bit difficult. Not to say that there hasn't been platforms out there. There are. And those platforms, those public marketplaces, have been dominated by a lot of people looking to acquire assets. That's the experience that everyone has generally had in those, is that if you're a seller, there's like, well, I forget what the stat is. It's something like 5 to 10 buyers for every seller. It's like on a dating platform, the buyers are the guys and the sellers are the women. And so they just get completely inundated. And so we've really sought to change that, the physics of that, on True Match. And so we have a very robust profiling section in which not only do you give basic information about your firm, but then we have dedicated profile sections for interviewing them, whether if they're a buyer, or seller, or both. They can be all three use cases on our platform. You can also have the option to make your profile public or private, not just from a macro perspective, but also from each one of these different sections, just your firm details as far as your contact information, your buyer profile, your seller profile. Then we've gone the extra step and added peer benchmarking as an aspect of a profile that you may make available or not, as well as then your complete Truelytics evaluation, not just the valuation, numbers that come out of it, of which we have four: discounted cash flow, multiple of EBITDA, multiple of EBOC, and multiple of EBIT. But also the ability to see all 50 different key performance indicators that cut across business, client, and revenue stability. And so I would think that our matchmaking solution has probably one of the most robust, not just data points around any given firm, but then algorithmically, it's matching these firms together, and it's prioritizing the ones that have committed to actually providing more information about themselves than not. And it's bubbling up to the top those firms that are approaching this in a very sincere manner, and pushing down to the bottom those firms that ultimately are gaming the system. There's even feedback mechanisms, et cetera. And so we want to make this a really good experience for both buyers and sellers, really strip out and deal with the signal to noise ratio that exists in the marketplace right now. And then also just change the game a little bit. Our platform does not take a fee for any successful matches like a lot of marketplaces do. We have no interest in that. If you end up finding a succession partner that you want to consummate a deal with, then we celebrate that. We certainly right now don't have in our business plan any mechanism or any interest in being in the middle of those types of deals. So we want to have a clean, consistent experience, but we also want to recognize that there's been some challenges with the traditional models that have presented themselves in the wealth management space. And I think we're going to see that how we've approached True Match is going to hopefully change some of that.
I really love it. And it goes to what we were talking a little bit about earlier, in that now that we're in this, that the first generation of advisors are retiring, and the business is becoming more business-like, if you will, right? Yeah. The origin of this business is, and I say this so frequently, I'm sure people have heard our podcasts get sick of this, but the origin of our business is most advisors were stockbrokers. They were sales guys who owned a book of business. They had a book of clients that they managed, and they were consistently trying to, sell them new product or whatever. And as the business became more of a fee-only business or fee-based business, where people have recurring revenue and they're starting to grow these things into, while they are small businesses, even if they have a couple of billion AUM, they're still legitimate businesses. Now the services and solutions like Truelytics and SkyView Partners, which recently added investment banking to the portfolio. So that's a kind of good segue into M&A as a type of a deal type, Scott. So maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the M&A trends you're seeing, which is, mergers and acquisitions, acquiring or selling a business or putting two businesses together.
Yeah, as I mentioned, the merger has certainly been of interest. But more recently, we've certainly seen some more urgency than we had historically around concern. Taxes are always going up, right? I mean, we all know that. There's uncertainty, taxes will rise, and Father Time beats everybody except Tom Brady. But we saw at the end of last year that we had a lot of people trying to sell before we were concerned that Biden would come in and impose a retroactive increase in cap gains. That the consensus now is 2022. So we're seeing definitely an increase in sellers saying, well, if I'm thinking about this in the next 3 to 5 years, this is probably the year to get it done. And we certainly don't want to give any artificial urgency to anyone to do the transaction, but it's more, we've been receiving that, and we're agnostic to the opinion. I'm not a tax expert, but there's a basis for some logic there to get the transaction done sooner than later.
Okay, very interesting. Let's touch a little bit before we get into some what can you do, some tangible, if you're listening to this podcast or seeing this video at the summit, we're going to be getting some tangible stuff. So hold on to your seat there just for a second. I want to talk about the emergency or the unplanned succession, because I think this is the one that goes overlooked very often. We start thinking about, 5 years from now, I might sell my business. As you, Scott, I might accelerate it if I'm nervous about, capital gains taxes going up or whatever. So there might be some timelines in there, but sometimes you don't control the timeline, right? Sometimes things happen, and it could be a death. We're in the middle of a pandemic right now. I think everybody's concerned about what might happen. Could be disability. Could be any number of reasons why an advisor might suddenly find themselves not in charge of the business and having to transition out. Jeremy, you and the team built a really interesting solution called True Continuity to support just that. I wonder if you might take us through that and what the logic was for creating True Continuity.
Yeah, so True Continuity is Truelytics really trying to deal with that massive statistic that I had said right up front, that 70-80% of this industry doesn't have a solution in place. And if you were to do the predictive analysis on our data set, we've got currently 9,000 evaluations on our platform, 9,000 independent financial advisory firms on our platform, another 11 to 12,000 RIAs that we've peer benchmarked with the Form ADV data. If you were to actually look at the predictive models that we've done on the data science side, the highest predictor of C grades within business stability are those firms that have identified themselves of not having a emergency continuity and or plan succession paperwork in place. And so we originally sought with True Continuity is to at least establish a foundation, emergency continuity locker. And so we give a financial advisory firm a secure online cloud solution where they can not only store their key agreements, not just their emergency continuity agreement, but any other specific agreement that they have that's really important to their business. We give them a secure online locker for that. We then take it an additional step and say, identify who are the key contacts that you have. It could be your wife, it could be your attorney, there could be several internal individuals within your firm that you want to identify as key contacts. It could be your contact over at your broker-dealer. So identify who all of those people are and identify who has download rights to those documents. And then put together an action plan so that whoever is in charge of taking over the firm from an emergency continuity perspective, they know your wishes. They know exactly what you think should be dealt with on first, second, third, or fourth. And so the workflow of the solution exists so that whoever is identified as that emergency continuity partner, if they come into the platform and go to unlock your emergency continuity vault, there's multi-factor authentication. They have to then explain why they're unlocking it. And then we keep a secure ledger, a time date stamp on who unlocked it when. And then they have complete access to the Rolodex, to the action plan, to all of them, those key documents. Our system also then takes the additional step of alerting all of those individuals within the online Rolodex who you've identified as key that it has been unlocked. And so this was our first attempt to provide that type of solution on our product roadmap. We want to take the second step of actually allowing financial advisory firms to, if they don't have an emergency continuity plan in place, to be able to actually do that online, sort of in a very LegalZoom-esque way. And so that's what version 2.0 of True Continuity is going to look like by the end of 2021.
I think that's really smart. And we talked about this earlier this year, or actually earlier 2020. It's all blended together now, right? Based on demographics of our industry, if you're in an independent broker dealer space or an RIA, right, with lots of advisors, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6% of your advisor population may pass in any given year. That's a big number, right? And it's exacerbated because COVID-19 pandemic is particularly acute and dangerous for those who are 65 and older. And it's not uncommon to find advisor populations that have a lot of 65 and older set in there. So being prepared is really, really important. Now, I know, Scott, I asked this question of you at one point in time, and you're like, well, we require every deal that comes through our doors, the buyer has to have a life insurance policy that would pay off the note. I thought that was a really smart thing to be in place, because what if, right? What if somebody passes?
That wasn't my idea. The banks just required it at the end of the day. So that's the forced succession. At least we're paying the loan obligation off plan.
Yeah. Really smart. So now let's get into that hands-on stuff that we promise in terms of preparing for a transition, whatever your transition is. I think the first thing to talk about is getting the business ready, right? Getting evaluation and understanding how your business is performing compared to its peers is obviously really important. What's the process that you ask folks to go through, Scott, to make sure that they're ready when you're talking about financing?
So when we're looking at a transaction, when a buyer with seller comes to us, we're obviously looking to see if this buyer is really qualified to a lot of different respects, not just from a credit standpoint, but from a scalability standpoint. Right now they're managing 140 households and they're trying to acquire practice with 750. Well, what's your plan for scaling those additional 750 households into your practice? Is it truly, retaining the key employees from acquire or is it really trying to build up your own staff? So really it's just preparedness to acquire. And I think we have been building our purchasing power score, which ranks buyers on our site, APBOE, based on their creditworthiness and their preparedness to acquire practice. I think we have 62 different data points around how prepared they are. And one of the big ones is, have you done this before and were you successful at doing it? And what were your client attrition rates in those transactions? And that's a key indicator for us if this is going to be a smooth transaction or not.
So one of the core use cases of Truelytics, Jeremi, that we know is that advisors and RIAs will come in to the platform as a key reason for it is they want to prepare for M&A activity. They want to prepare for a transaction. So what do you encourage them to do when they first come into Truelytics to kind of get the ball rolling?
Yeah, well, I would encourage a step even before you log into Truelytics. If you either come in and subscribe to our service directly, or if you get it through a broker dealer, a custodian or asset manager, or an OSJ, is go to truelytics.com/benchmark and just enter in your AUM, and you'll get to see where your firm sits from a peer group perspective and see a lot of different diagnostics of your peer group related to business, client, and revenue stability, and be able to even go down and see the details related to the average staff count, the average AUM, the average longevity of your book, et cetera. And so I think that's a really good first step. It will give you a sense of where you fall. It's almost like getting that Z estimate from Zillow, right? It's quick, it's easy, and that will give you maybe an understanding of the areas that you might need to focus on given the averages that roll up from your peer group perspective. Once you do log in, and by the way, also go to riabase.com. That's another property that we launched. It's free. And for any of the RIAs that are out there, we've done that same benchmarking, but also took the additional step of doing it with the Form ADV data. So either truelytics.com/benchmark or riabase.com, either of those properties give you that initial sense of your peer group and how they're performing. When you get into Truelytics from a platform perspective, we very much urge all of our new users to go through True Performance. And that's a 7-step intake process. There's about 150 questions that are involved in that. All of our enterprise subscribers have that already pre-populated for them from their broker dealer, et cetera. But all in all, it doesn't take more than 10 or 15 minutes. And this is a diagnostic of the health and wellness of your firm, and go through that in detail. Go through the very specific 50 key performance indicators across business, client, and revenue stability, and really see where your business is maybe leaving money on the table, and identify the places where you could really begin to change different aspects of your business from a process perspective, et cetera, and really optimize that, so that when you go out for a strategic exit, you're poised to, one, not only look professional to that strategic buyer, that you've dealt with these things that a lot of people just don't think about. Again, it's a lifestyle business, right? Predominantly, there's a lot of lifestyle businesses that make up wealth management. And so it will show a level of seriousness that you've taken on your business. And it's also then a path to just maximize that outcome for yourself. So that's a really good place to start before you get into any matchmaking or et cetera. Even it's a great place to start as a step before true continuity, just so that you've done that assessment then that is attached to your emergency continuity locker, so that in that event that someone has to actually engage that, they have a really solid record of your business value at the time of that event.
I think that's really smart. And Scott, you've mentioned this a few different times as well. Like, there are things you can do before the deal, and specifically before you go looking for financing, to make sure you're ready, right? To start this out. Like, don't wait until you're like, you know what? I see a business I want to buy. Let me go get ready. What are some of the things that you recommend an advisor or RIA firm do before their process of getting ready to come acquire financing for the deal?
From a financing perspective, what's interesting is that when we went out to banks and tried to convince them that they should be extending credit to financial advisors, it was an interesting, I think somewhat insulting response. They said many of their experiences that financial advisors were very unorganized. And we heard that several times, and we thought that was very odd. You know, Gary's Pizza, Joe's Car Wash, I mean, you're dealing with these other people. But at the end of the day, it makes total sense, because financial advisors, yes, are unsophisticated commercial borrowers, and to no fault of their own, they've never been extended credit for M&A until very recently, until LIBO came out in 2013. So from our standpoint, we help with the entire packaging, getting all docs in, basically helping them make their best presentation to our 32 banks. But what they can do in advance, and what everybody in commercial real estate does, if you're in commercial real estate, you have one cloud folder that when asked for whatever's needed for financing, it's just boom, it's over by the end of the day. And it's 3 years personal tax returns, it's 3 years business tax returns, it's a PFS, a personal financial statement. A lot of advisors haven't built them for themselves. I mean, it's kind of interesting to us that we have a template that gets used very often. Their advisors have never required a PFS for anything or needed one. So really, creating your own cloud of financial documents that you would need certainly expedites the financing process.
Yeah, that's really, really smart advice. So let's touch on a couple of quick trends. I mean, we are kind of reaching the end of the podcast here, but I want to make sure we hit on a couple of quick things. One of the trends, Scott, that you mentioned that you see that caught you by surprise, and it caught me by surprise too, was the notion of the partial sale of a business. That when you think about M&A activity, very often your brain, or succession planning, you think of, I think your initial thought is somebody's going to pull the ripcord, right? I'm selling my business. You know, Jeremy's going to come in and acquire my business, and once we sign those contracts, I'm out, right? I'm just done. And it doesn't work that way in this business. What's been interesting about partial sales that's going to take you by surprise?
So in our first year, partial sales only accounted for about 18% of our business. More recently, they're about 67% of all transactions. And if you think about it, it makes total sense for the financial advisor that, look, being a financial advisor is a great gig, right? And if there's a way that, especially with our investment banking clients, we work with them and say, like, hey, what do you like doing every day, and what do you not like doing every day? And the things that you don't like doing every day, well, when you sell, let's assign those roles and responsibilities to that new buyer, and let's keep you on for doing the things you like, whether it be going out and getting new assets, get back to the world, spinning again, going golfing, taking client relationship, but still be a part of that practice in some meaningful way. And if it's a partial sale or also a consulting agreement or employment agreement where they have no equity, but yet still are very involved with the practice post-transaction, buyer and seller or buyer should be very interested in that seller staying a part of the practice in some way to help the continuity of that practice. And most advisors, this is what they've done. I mean, I can't imagine selling SkyView. I mean, what I do, I don't do anything else, right? And I think for a lot of advisors, they like to continue working. If it's 2 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours a day, it's an option that they'd like to have.
I totally get it too, right? It's there are pain in the butt parts of any business, right? That you'd rather not be doing, but there's also a lot of joy in it, right? And plus, I always think about it like these are relationship-based businesses, right? You have built your advisory business, and you've watched your clients' kids grow up, sometimes their grandchildren, right? You're not necessarily looking to just like exit those relationships, really. You're more, again, you're looking for some sort of business exit that might be a more gentle glide path. Jeremy, have you seen any trends that you're thinking this is probably going to accelerate or tick up in the next decade or so?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I'll just underscore the point that was just made. I actually was just presenting at Dimensional Funds M&A conference just this last week via a webcast, and one of the participants there actually said that the only deals they're looking at are the deals in which the other owner of the practice that they're looking to acquire stays involved, that they're in the foxhole together. They have no interest. They will not pursue anybody looking to sell their whole book, or it's very rare that they do. They just claimed that it's just easier for them to make sure that they get value out of that if the other player is still intimately engaged in some way, shape, or form, ideally side by side with them. So that's just one single data point. That was one piece of feedback that came out of that conference, but I thought it underscored what we're just talking about. It's interesting. We're seeing the industry collapse up, right? Because of the opportunity that exists here. Yes, there's this huge demographic pressure that's potentially going to continue to see a rise in M&A. And as Scott said at the beginning of the call, it's incumbent upon all of us to really help make that a better experience than it's been to date. There's a lot of interest in acquiring these assets under management. We're seeing a lot of interest in enterprises, OSJs, broker-dealers, et cetera, beginning to no longer want to rent this revenue. They're wanting to own the revenue themselves. And so the irony of these breakaways from wirehouses going indie and going to a broker-dealer, and now seeing some of these enterprises beginning to seriously consider buying these books of businesses directly, not just matching people within the network, but buying the revenue and owning the revenue. I think that's another trend that we're beginning to see present itself in these early days.
That's a really fascinating one that we've been talking about for a year or so now, that you're seeing there's a lot of risk at play in the independent broker dealer, right? They don't own the advisor's revenue stream, right? And so if you're at an IBD, you could have a really bad season and watch 20% of your revenue walk out the door, right? That's scary, right? And it's hard to backfill that, right? Because most IBD executives spend most of their time trying to recruit new advisors. I think we can close it out here with something I think is important to make sure we touch on. And that is landmines, right? Anytime you're going down this type of path and you're potentially thinking about selling your business, exiting the business, or acquiring a business, there's bound to be some risks involved, right? Especially because for most advisors, and Scott, you and I have talked about this before. You talked about one of the key success indicators you look for is advisors who have done this before, who have walked the path before. But for most, it's going to be the first time. It's going to be the first time they sell or buy a business. They've been doing what they're doing for 20, 30 years, maybe more. So I wonder if you've seen any landmines or risks that advisors should prepare themselves to avoid, learn from others' experience.
On the buy side, it's patently obvious to us for this 2% number to change. I think we need better messaging on the buy side. And what I mean by that is we oftentimes hear buyers going up to sellers saying, hey, look, I'm going to cut you this great check. You're going to go away. Everything's going to be great. I'm going to take over. Before failing to utilize the sales skills that got them to where they're at today, which is ask the seller what they actually would like, see if that's accommodating to what their plans are. And oftentimes they're very aligned, and helping, better understand what the seller has built this practice over the course of 2, 3, 4 decades. This is an emotional experience for them. Put yourself in their shoes, which hopefully we'll all be in someday. And it's really about understanding how they'd like to retire, to whom, and over what time horizon. And that's all we focus on the investment banking side is, hey, you tell us how to get the transaction done and at what price, and we'll tell you if that's possible. And oftentimes it is, but most buyers fail to really, I hate to say it, listen and really ask the questions about what the seller really is looking for. And they think just throwing a check at them is going to solve all the problems. That's not the case. And on the sell side, I would say this, that I think most people, if you're going to sell $1 million, $2 million, $3 million home, you would never enter into that transaction without a realtor. And we absolutely feel the same, that why would you ever go to sell maybe your most valuable asset without the help of an investment banker? I mean, that's very self-promoting, but it's absolutely illogical to me to enter this unless an advisor's been involved in M&A their whole career. Then that's something that they could probably take on themselves. But most advisors, although extremely obviously financially savvy, not savvy when it comes to obtaining financing, and not savvy as the M&A process, or at least to the extent they probably think they are.
That's really smart. How are you, Jeremy? Have you seen any kind of landmines pop up over the years? We've got thousands and thousands of advisors now and firms that are on the Truelytics platform. I'm sure there's been a couple of things you bubbled up and you're like, oh yeah, beware of that one.
Well, I mean, one of the things we built within TrueMatch is a deal analyzer. So if two firms create a deal room, one of the options that they have is to look at a deal analyzer in which our algorithm really looks at both firms and their answers to some very specific questions about things like the opportunity itself. Does either side of them have experience with acquisition? Do they have the resources needed for an acquisition? Have they been successful in organic growth? And do they have the capital to fuel the acquisition after the fact? Or have they pursued acquisitions in the last 5 years? All of those, there's a handful of probably about a dozen data points that our system looks at from both parties' perspectives. And depending upon their answers on that, it's going to either rate that as a good opportunity or not, so that those landmines can be avoided. And that's been born out of just the data set that we have and just the last 3 or 4 years of seeing these types of firms try to come together. And if some of those don't align, then yeah, they're doomed to run into some challenges.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, Scott Wetzel of SkyView Partners, Jeremi Karnell of Truelytics, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. It's always so great to see you. I can't wait till we can see each other in person. Yeah. For all those who have listened to the show, really appreciate your time. Thank you to Broadridge. Thank you to Advisorist for having us at their virtual financial advisor summit. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you'd like to reach out, please do hit up SkyView.com or info@skyview.com if you want to reach out. And of course, Truelytics as well, Truelytics.com or info@Truelytics.com. Really easy. The emails match up. I think you guys coordinated that. Anyway, thank you both for joining me today. I really, really appreciate you having me.
You got it. Thanks a lot. Nice seeing you, Scott. Cheers.
You as well.